Hi, my name's Paul Arnold and I'm a qualified psychotherapist and I'm also a trained coach. And today's session I want to talk about dealing with men's issues. And this is not to say that women's issues are not just as important. It's just that being a man, I can talk more about that space. And I respect that sometimes men want to talk to women about men's issues and sometimes women want to talk about women's issues with men. But for now, this is the topic I'm going to talk about. Again, I can only scratch the surface of it, and I'll go a little bit into some theories and I'll give you some potential strategies, which are very sort of behavioral, very cognitive, but actually there's still a role within the therapy room to deal with what sits underneath it. What's the belief systems? What's the emotional feelings? How do you deal with that stuff is a place that we can deal with that. So let's start to dig into this stuff. And I think there are sort of two angles on this. The first is just like, navigating being a male in these current fluid, dynamic, changing times. The question which I often ask is, what's it like being a young man, an old man, a gay man, a Sikh man, a Muslim man, a Jewish man, a handicapped man these days? Because we've all got different experiences of what it's like and how we are met in that space of what I call our masculinity. And I appreciate that women as well are trying to navigate this space, about what is it like to be a woman in this space and what am I expected to be like and what do I want to be like? And then of course we've got the whole sexual identity, and again in these fluid days, am I living the truth of who I really am? What is my innate natural sexual identity? Where am I drawn towards? And this need to be able to sort of deal with the acceptance and the upheaval that may bring about. Let's dip into a bit of theory. Gregory Bateson did a very nice sort of model that I always really liked, which is called the sort of logical levels. And, there are more levels than this, but the ones I find the most powerful ones is this idea that actually there we've got our identity, who we see ourselves to be. What are the beliefs and values that sits underneath that? What are our capabilities? What's the behavior we do? And what's the environment we are in? Now, all of those work together. And if you think about it, the environment is changing. And the way we see ourselves to be affects the way that our behavior is. And very often we have had what I call introjected scripts, how we are perceived that we need to be in this world, to be accepted, to be, as Byrne would call, stroked. There's a great phrase which he used, which said, how does someone like me get accepted in a world like this with people like that around me? And basically what happens at a very young age, we're either told what to go and do, and they talk about drivers and, and injunctions, this idea of like sort of, be strong, be perfect, try hard, don't be, all these various things are going on. So we learn at a very early age how we should be to be accepted. And probably alongside that, Bowlby talks about internal working model. It's almost like the background, of what's going on inside your computer. What's the fundamental paradigms, the belief systems you have about how to be and how to navigate in this world? And how to be accepted, and critically, for most of us, how not to be rejected. So these get formed at a very early age. And no surprising that, we still run those well past their sell-by date. So very often what we're doing in the therapy room is start to identify and examine them and start to hold them up and say, Does this still work? And is there maybe a better one that we need to put in its place? Now, this whole brings the whole topic about who we are is not, and we are not islands. We live in this, we are created and we formed and are constantly reformed by the relationships we have around us. And the whole sort of theory of intersubjectivity is this idea about how it's almost like the rubbing up against other people helps us realize that is us and that is them. And this is where my projection of who I am is either being met positively or being met negatively. So very often, and this is where, living in a very sort of culturally, benign space where no one says boo to a goose doesn't help, because we need to have the ruptures to say what you said just then is deeply offensive. And we need to be able to learn to deal with that and accept it without going to massive sort of, rejection of what they said or defense or whatever. How can we accept that? We're all rubbing along against each other, and sometimes we get it right and sometimes we get it wrong. Now, strategies, I think, look, there's something about recognizing the trigger point, recognizing when we get those ruptures, inquiring into, very often, because we don't live in a world that people often say it, you'll notice it with their expression, oh, did I say something that didn't quite work with you? And accept they have a different map of reality. It's not saying your map of reality is wrong, but they have a different map. And I think we need to live in a place of massive respect for each other. We must respect that everyone has their point of view. And the most important thing I suggest you do with anyone is to acknowledge and validate their sense of who they are. That's the most powerful gift you can give to a person. At the same time, I think it's really important you have a very strong sense of self. I'm not saying it should be some sort of belligerent, well, that's the way I am, you just take me as that. But there's something like, know that you have strengths, know you have certain weaknesses and vulnerabilities, but just being okay with who you are is what I'm saying. And accepting your vulnerabilities, and we'll talk about that in another session. I'll talk about house shadow. And I think the most important thing, every relationship is powerfully improved by the rupture and the repair, because the rupture lets us know that someone's intersubjective presence hasn't been met very well. And actually repair is where we can actually help shape that and move with it. And I often say, we shouldn't be going into some sort of defense. Well, yeah, you're just wrong. No, let's I understand where you are. I appreciate you see that differently. And I talk about this idea about impact versus intent. I never meant that to be like that. And I always talk about the double whammy. So I didn't mean it like that, I meant it like that. This is what I tried to say. And I think, apology and saying sorry is a really powerful thing to do as long as you genuinely mean it. So, the role of psychotherapy can play a really important thing because it helps you navigate your way through this quite confusing times. But I think it's really important because within that space we can help build a truer, more resilient you. I hope that helps.